So this is unfortunately the last lecture, though I have a lot of interesting slides that people who are interested, I mean, analysis, after that it is very deep analysis, uh, as Ruchi was mentioning, Ruchi was asking this question. So those questions actually will be answered deeper into that, but I will stop at the basic level, and because that is a syllabus for this workshop. And so then we'll in afternoon there will be a wrap up session, and then all remaining questions will be answered. And if the students, my group, they allow me to teach for some more time, half an hour, then I will see if some slides are pending, so I'll sum it up. And there will be one uh, basically final ceremony, which will be attended by Director's Namuni, so be there. Okay, so what parameters can we determine? As you can see, that you can obviously you can have film thickness, optical constants, and you can these questions were asked and were answered also, but it is just like a summary that you can go from sub nanometer to 30 micron. And please note that when we discuss about 30 micron, then material quality, its type, there are many, and okay, it matters a lot. So for example, this will not be applicable for metals, because metals are strongly absorbing. So please keep it in mind that it is subject to the presence of free electrons or not. So you can use variety of substrates we have already seen, and we can look at multi-layer structures, and this is very important that we can look at not only surface roughness but also interfacial roughness. Yesterday we got some example that I mean, I normally fit interfacial roughness also, which always helps. So you can look at band gap, and uh, okay, so and that helps you to understand the electronic transitions. And as the student was discussing, that you can very well look at the composition analysis. For example, in this case, aluminum in okay, aluminum gallium arsenide, which is very famous actually used material in the semiconductor industry. You can also use, so these we could not demonstrate some of the because we don't have samples. Actually, uh, we are not actually a semiconductor lab. So usually these substrates are there with the semiconductor labs, and people who have deposition system. We don't have actually uh, physical deposition systems, but we are expected to get samples at least for the second workshop from ISER, and then we will demonstrate these four things. Actually. These four things are pending, and this will be reserved for advanced workshop. So I think these other things are already covered in the first workshop. These things are covered, I think. Yeah. So so basically, you can these things are already covered. So, but it's mostly it's a recap actually, that in application areas, semiconductors, chemistry, you can in chemistry you can look at self-assembled layers, SAM, and polymer films, proteins, and amino acids. Also, I have done a lot of amino acids. We have done a lot of uh, 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 basically self-assembled layers. We published a paper for ISER also, with using lip symmetry in one analytical chemistry journal. You can look at the display materials, and it is extremely useful for solar photovoltaics, various kinds of characterization. We have discussed all these things. And one of the students asked about real-time monitoring. So you can monitor live, growth on substrates uh, by CVD or molecular beam epitaxy and other methods. Not only that, you can look at the etching processes also, not the reverse actually, right? Etching processes. and other things actually. So these are the two restrictions that measurement has to be performed at an oblique incident. And Anjana asked this question yesterday. I still don't have answer, Anjana, about the transmission geometry. Transmission geometry, as I said, it's possible, but I'm not sure about the modeling because I have not seen actually. So probably I will separately send you the answer. But as of now, I can just confirm that only oblique incidents uh, allow you to make those models. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. As I mentioned that I have done thousands of measurements used in the transmission geometry, but the reason was different. I was trying to look at the chirality of amino acids, whether I can differentiate between dextrorotatory and levorotatory. Okay, so uh, then it will become. But I face the problem uh, of wavelength because signal was, I mean, uh, our instrument can go only from 240 nanometer to 1000 nanometer, and I needed lambda less than this actually, which I did not have for to work with the most of the amino acids. So I wanted to check difference between D and L. So what I did was, I put these arms parallel to each other, if symmetry arms. So then I put the sample in the quartz cuvette, and then I did it in the transmission geometry, and I was looking at psi and delta to see whether if it is dextrorotatory or levorotatory, whether it is changed for the same amino acid, whether we can capture like different kinds of sugar. So and then it will be a very good analysis technique for industry because even for pharma industry, so they can quickly check. Uh, they have this problem actually that Pooja Yadav will confirm with me that she's a analytical chemist. That pharma industry is looking for those kinds of right, Pooja, right? Quick tools to. There are tools actually, but in pharma, it is really recommended. So let us look at the disadvantage. Advantages we already know. One of the uh, most impressive advantage is high precision. High precision means you do it over and over again, you get the same results actually. But we'll discuss about accuracy very soon. And thickness sensitivity is a fraction of angstrom. It is non-destructive, very fast. You have seen that wide application area, and you can look at many parameters comes out, and nice thing about this tool, as we discussed yesterday, in contrast to many other techniques, basically that you can get subsurface information as I think Ruchi madam, right? Ruchi was also mentioning that. So this is the advantage which is not uh, there with many other tools like AFM and other things. So without destroying the sample, getting the subsurface information is not that easy. So we should appreciate this technique, and and you can do real-time monitoring. Disadvantages is that you need practice to perfect your optical model in data analysis. I mean, there is no it's I mean there is no shortcut for data analysis. It has to be learned hard ways. I mean, it's not easy actually. It gets complicated when you try to, for example, that student asked the question about doping concentration and amorphous and crystalline ratio is easy. uh, and I've done the porosity analysis also using this. A lot of things we have done as and when we get the sample. So we have the sample and then we do it actually. We keep getting samples from IISER, Pune University many times, um, and defense institutes also. So data analysis tends to be complicated. Yeah, that is the problem, that low spatial resolution, but you can get away with this with the focusing probe, as Mayank Dubey and um, team, they have been also we have discussed. You can use focusing probe, um, but then focusing probe has its own limitation because you cannot go down below certain spot size. But I taught you about near field mode, right? Near field mode. So please don't forget near field mode. You can always use TIRE, total internal reflection ellipsometry, where you can beat this uh, resolution problems. So there is, after that there is no problem. I mean, you can beat this disadvantage easily. Difficulty in characterization of low absorption coefficients. That was a, problem we were facing with the amino acids actually in the spectral range. So absorption was not that much. So we had to stop that. So it was very exciting journey. We learned quite a lot. So this is the characterization flow chart that you and a more detailed flow chart will be given in the next workshop, which is going to be very soon. We will be going much deeper, but here this is the basic thing that you have. You measure psi and delta as a function of energy, and then you construct the optical model. Then you measure basically optical constants and film thickness, and okay. So basically, based on the R and T, what you measure is basically R and T, and then you can get various values out of that, right? Whether it is phase structure, alloy composition, and surface temperature as well, and then crystalline to amorphous voids. I'm not sure what grain size. Grain size analysis can be done, but yeah, but those samples are going to be very tricky because if you have a granular sample, then it's going to be rough. So there is a limitation. Uh, as long as the grain size is very small, there are sizes are very small, and your samples remain still polished sample, then there is no problem. And you can do a lot more. For example, carrier concentration, carrier mobility, and conductivity, etc. Yes. And this is for the real-time ellipsometry, which we can skip because I'm not sure whether anybody among you is interested in real-time ellipsometry. You might be interested, but then you have to attach your ellipsometer with the real-time deposition system. But you know that there are two models for the thin film growth. One is basically first island formation, and then these island merge, okay, to form a layer. And another is basically, it depends upon the wettability of the substrate, right? Depending upon the wettability of the substrate, then you may have different kinds of growth model. Yeah. So there are two kinds of techniques, single wavelength. It's also known as laser ellipsometry. Usually we use a helium neon laser with the wavelength of 632.8. So this advantage is that it's very simple and you can focus on a small spot, and then in fact the signal is very strong actually. Signal is very, very strong. And xenon source, that's a problem actually. So but you get only one set of psi and delta for per measurement. So then your analysis becomes challenging. Spectroscopic ellipsometry, that's the advantage that you have uh, broad band light sources, and then you get a lot more data, and you can cover a lot more uh, spectral regions, and then it gives you a large number of properties. But from rough samples, intensity becomes very a problem actually, because if your sample is rough, then you will not get much signal. So for polished surface it is fine, but the advantage is that the source is weak, incompressible laser, so you don't damage the sample. Limitations are there has been a lot of discussions in this group about this. So this is actually a formal. I have been answering those questions time and again, but finally, this is a summary that um, film thickness is not too much smaller or larger than the wavelength of the light used, and it is difficult to use a probe of 500 nanometer wavelength to characterize, for example, 5 angstrom, or too large actually, for example, 10,000 nanometer. So you can play with the wavelength always. And so these details I mean, do not require any physical explanation. You can read them, and we can move on. So ellipsometry is best for smooth surfaces. When we say, we have discussed these things already, 10% of the uh, wavelength, right? So, but I think there was a question about steel surfaces. So this is the answer, that industrial rolled aluminum surfaces have been used. Industrial rolled, actually, they're quite rough, by using IR ellipsometry, right? But mirror-like surfaces are routine, actually. You can easily do them. Yeah, this is another problem, that when you shine the beam in the where for example, um, this is the sample wedge shape, right? And your beam is falling on this area up, right? So if you look at the this is the thickness here at this point, and at this point thickness, this is the thickness. So there is a thickness variation here between from this point to this point. So it should not be 10% over the width of the spot. I mean, obviously, if you use focusing probe, then you don't need to worry too much about these problems. And I would have taught, actually, the percentage. I mean, we calculated. You can calculate, actually, easily the percentage of depolarization. I explained you that if you shine the polarized light on to the rough surfaces, then some part of the light get depolarized. So in ellipsometry, actually, you can easily calculate the amount of depolarization, right? So we will probably keep it for the next workshop. We'll demonstrate all these things. This is very important slide, one of the most important, because this question keeps on coming about precision and accuracy. Ellipsometry is highly precise, but its accuracy is difficult to determine. I mean, precision can be easily confirmed, but how do you confirm the accuracy? To confirm the accuracy, you need to know the true value. For example, you are looking at N and K and thickness. So ellipsometry, suppose, gives you thickness. For example, okay, ellipsometry gives you these values. E stands for ellipsometry. So these are values obtained from ellipsometry. But how do you know that these are the right value? These are the correct values. How do you know? I mean, so you need to, for example, you want to know the length of, I mean, the height of your body. So you take one measuring tape and you measure the height of your body, and then your measuring tape gives you some value that your height is 170 centimeter, plus minus whatever 1 centimeter, whatever, or 0.5 centimeter, whatever it is. But this value is measured by you using some measuring tape. But what is the guarantee that that measuring tape is calibrated and measuring tape is I mean, this value is true value? Same thing is in the TEM. TEM, basically, suppose we calculate that this particle size is around 50 nanometer. But how do we make sure that this TEM is reading the true value? So true value is basically, normally it is reserved with the ISO, right? You know, International Standards Organization. So they they basically give you some standards, and then you basically replicate those standards, and then you know that now new standards are there, those 7 SI units. Okay, I think 2017 they ISO 2017 or 18, I don't remember, but new standards have come out for those 7 fundamental SI units, right? Mass and all this, temperature and all those things. So current and yeah. So that's the problem. So how do you know what is true? Because um, ellipsometry, so the problem is that it is impossible to specify the accuracy of the ellipsometer to the level of its precision, because you need another measurement technique with accuracy comparable to the extreme precision of the ellipse meter. How do you do that? I mean, it is because you need another technique actually, equally or even better than ellipse meter. That's a major problem. You can use TEM or Rutherford backscattering or atomic force microscopy, but we have discussed in this course that each of these techniques, they have their own problems. Okay, it's not like any technique is free of problem. It's not like, so that has to be considered. And one of the best way to measure the it's not required, but if you are curious, you can easily keep the arms in the transmission geometry. So you can, for example, you can take it to the transmission geometry and then just measure without any sample. So delta should be uh, almost close to zero, and you can see that this fluctuation here is very small. This value is 0.05 and minus point. So that tells you that this is highly accurate. I mean, you can, so ellipsometry can self-check its own accuracy as well as precision actually. So similarly, you can see that psi value should be 45, and they are almost at almost 45. Okay. Um, so this is a way to do the quality control and check things actually. Components, these are again generic details. Please do not compare it with your own ellipsometer. These are just generic details. Ellipsometer for every company, even within a company, different. There are different kinds of ellipsometer. There is always change, but fundamentals you already know actually. Okay, there are a lot of changes from company to company. So let's not go into that. So first, basically in any ellipsometer, first you need a polarizer, then you need analyzer, then you have a sample. So and you have a light source and some kind of detector. That's a basic design actually. So for example, xenon lamp, I think some students were asking this question. So xenon lamp has a limit from 190 nanometer to 2 micrometer, but then it's not like you can safely use entire wavelength. So that's the reason that this our setup has 242 242,000. I mean, it can stress the higher wavelength uh, to further. I mean, but below 240, it's very difficult. So I think you need a deuterium lamp if you want to go below 240. You can't. I mean, it can go to 190, but there is a problem. So it is better, and then you need actually uh, confined housing actually, because of the ozonization. I think the UV starts interacting with the oxygen, and it forms ozone, which might be dangerous. Okay, so that's the that's the reason below 240 you have to be careful, because these uh, UVs, deep UVs can be a bit dangerous to handle. And so that's the reason that, and you need different optics also, little bit. Okay. Um, so as it is written that uh, it starts showing low intensity xenon lamp below 260. And another problem with the xenon lamp is that very strong atomic emission line at from it, that can easily saturate the detector actually, because those are very strong, very sharp lines actually. Okay, atomic emission lines, so they can saturate the. So these things are practical. They pose practical problem. And similarly, you have choices for detectors. So you can use photodiode, photomultiply tube, and then you can diode arrays, CCD arrays, and all kinds of things you can use. So it is basically, the choice is different for different models actually, even within companies. So these names are models for the same company, J. Ulam, but you can see that there is a diversity within the company itself. So different. Okay. So this basic geometry we can skip because we have discussed it hundreds of times. I'm joking, not hundreds of times, but at least few times. This has been discussed. I think this is clear to you. One thing very interesting that nobody asked this question, that P is fine, P for parallel, but why it is, what S stands for? S is actually from Senkrecht or whatever. I can't pronounce it, but that stands for perpendicular in German. So this is basically German. You know, we say always P polarized and S polarized. So you might be wondering that P to ठीक है, P is fine for parallel, but what is the what is why for perpendicular we are writing uh, S? So here is the answer. Okay, so this is because of the German language. I mean, this has been answered, so I'll skip this. In case you have any question, you can ask me. This has been really debated a lot, and there are some more examples of various samples. For example, reflectance of bulk silicon. You know, there is a repetition, so I can skip it. But in case you have any question, let me know. So this is there are various examples of reflection. So RP versus RS is mentioned. So this example is quite. I mean, this is already discussed. But copper, you know, you can see copper at you know, thickness is 630 nanometer. So here, if you note that RP for conductive films does not go to absolute zero, but if you see for dielectric films, RP goes to zero here. That's the thing you should note actually, even for semiconductor. But for metals, it does not happen. So metals are different actually because of free electron. Yeah. So Brewster angle, it has been covered quite a lot, and you can see, I think Monica was showing you the behavior of lambda, which gets to 90. You can see that it sharply drops and then it goes to 90. This is 90 here, and at the Brewster angle. So this has been discussed. So it's just a repetition or recap. So maximum sensitivity to the film parameter is near the Brewster angle, where RP is minimum. So whether it is metallic film, RP does not go to zero, but for metallic, but it goes through the minimum. So you can see that here in this area, all these values are quite sensitive because RP versus RS ratio becomes much larger, right? And this is what you are measuring actually. So RP versus RS ratio will be largest in this area. You know, at Brewster angle and below, just below it and just above it, this area. So you can choose one angle around Brewster angle, one below it, and one above it. That's the you know. So this has been discussed already. So I'll skip it. This has been discussed, so this is good to refresh. So suppose you have low index film on high index substrate, so pseudo Brewster angle will decrease, and opposite, if you have high index film on low index substrate, then obviously the pseudo Brewster angle is going to increase. I think this has been discussed, so it's again a repetition. I skip it. And this also has been discussed. So the general rule of thumb while deciding the angle of incident. Now, from here, there is a little bit of change of the topic, and so what happens finally? You are done with all these, you know, reflection from various layers. So then, as we have discussed, that there is a phase difference between these waves. Okay, number one, number two, number three, and there are many actually, not just number one, number two, number three. So there will be phase difference and amplitude difference, and here RP and RS, RP or RS, RS and RP and RS ratio is going to be different, and then finally it all gets mixed up and it reaches to the detector, and there before that it gets separated, and then you basically analyze the polarization, and then you finally detect it. So then you get so thicker films have more oscillations because of interference. And okay. So finally, R total, the wave when it reaches to the detector, basically reflected signal, is the combination of various these kinds of possibilities. Okay, so you can clearly see that there will be more if you have more layers. So as I mentioned, I think day for yesterday, that you can easily by hand also you can calculate using Frankel's equation the signal here, and different from the different layer. It's easy to calculate, and okay, for simpler systems. And then, and that's what it is done. That's what is done actually in the ellipsometer. I will come back to this in a moment. So in the program, whether it is complete ease or W base, that's what we are doing when we design the thin film and then do the analysis. Basically, we are calculating it. Okay, and N1 we know, N2 we put a guess, and then we calculate this and then compare it with the measured value, and then you do the least square refinement. This is a very interesting slide actually. This I would like to, because it's a new topic and it is very useful. What should be the step size actually? Normally you can see that, for example, this is the simplest examples everybody gives. So now you can say that here data is taken at every 25 nanometer, and this scale is wavelength in nanometer. So how do you decide actually what should be the step size in which wavelength, whether it is fine or not? And if you have thick film, you can see that if this is thick film and you have many oscillations. So here it does not matter because there is not much change in the psi as a function of wavelength. So here you can take points a bit far away for thinner film. So thinner film can afford to you can afford to take, and here you need to take a little bit closer points, but you can see that step size is quite quite liberal. But here step size cannot be liberal, it has to be too tight. You can see 2 nanometer because there is so much of change happening here. There is so much of change up and down happening. You need data at least at every 2 nanometer. Otherwise, your fitting will be a problem. So, dear ellipsometry users among you, if you are facing some issues in the, I told my students also that many times, if you're wondering that why I'm not getting fit, everything I'm doing, everything all right. So it's much likely that your step size is not enough. So you might be missing some of these oscillations actually. Please note that. And example is okay, yeah. So this is another example of oscillation. I think we touched upon this topic a day for yesterday, that this is 50 nanometer oxide on silicon. You can see the behavior of lambda, and if you increase the thickness, you have more oscillations. And 1 micron oxide, you have more oscillations. 5 micron, you have so many oscillations. So how do you do that? For example, this is one more example, that if you collect the data at every 12.4 nanometer, and total points taken in this spectral region is there are 82 points taken. 1, 2, 3, 4. For example, you count, there are 82 points, and the step size is same, 12.4. And if you look at this graph carefully, it looks very odd, because in the area where you needed more spacing, you have less data, because here features are changing quite fast, but you don't have more points here. You should have been having more points here actually to get clarity. So this point, for example, this peak may not be here. So it would have been, this peak would have been here, but because you don't have any points, so you're considering that this peak is here. This can be a false peak. The real peak may be somewhere here, but you don't have enough points. In contrast, you have unnecessarily, you have more points in this area. You can see that you don't need lot of points here. So if you plot the same thing in the energy terms, and you can see this problem much clearly, that here in the higher energy areas you don't have sufficient point, but in the lower energy area you have unnecessarily lot of points actually. So when you reverse this using this equation, the x-axis, you realize the problem, and this affects your fit quality. Please note that even if you're doing everything fine, everything nicely, so this problem can affect you. So what do you do if in this case, instead of taking instead of, for this kind of samples, instead of deciding your step size in wavelength, if you decide in basically electron volt, okay, instead of nanometer, if you take so you can see that immediately, you can see that there is a marked difference. You can see here. So you can see that there are sufficient number of points. It's better than this actually, better than the earlier case. You can see that here points are asymmetrically distributed. Okay, there are more points here. So it is advisable that you choose the step size in electron volt rather than nanometer. So you get much better spacing, equal distribution, rather than cramming one area here, like here. Okay, so this is this is always a question, that whether wavelength or photon energy. So these are some guidelines. For example, for thicker transparent films, features are abrupt and quickly changing at short wavelength. We have seen that, right? For example, at shorter wavelength, you might experience abrupt changes. So it is better to measure in terms of electron volt. If you have thicker UV absorbing film, which are opaque below 400 nanometer, so you can decide actually that shorter wavelength will be flat and there won't be any abrupt changes. So then, for example, just silicon is a good example for that, or titania or something like that. So then you can afford to, without any problem, you can choose your scale as nanometer. And another example is that if you take very thick transparent films, more than very thick actually, like 5 micron. So for short wavelength, it will be difficult, and measure only long wavelength in terms of nanometer, and then you can switch to electron volts at the shorter. So you can divide actually the spectral range in two parts. Okay, so this is a summary here, that for several film thicknesses, what should be the step size, and in electron volt and in nanometer. So you can look at that. But I explained you the logic and behind that, what is the problem and what is the solution. And without spending much time on this table, which seems to me very boring actually, so I'll move to the next topic. And again, this topic has been discussed. This is again a summary that why do we select variable angles. So the reason is that you have so suppose you change the angle. So this wave, if it is not that high n2, if n2 is too high, this is n1 and n2, so then your refraction angle will be too abrupt, and then your path length will be shorter, right? And then it does not make much difference. But if your n2 is not too strong, then this light will not bend that much. And if you do it at oblique angle, so what will happen, that light will travel more path in the layer, so you will have much better interaction, much stronger interaction with your film. Okay, it won't happen that it enters and it exits actually immediately. So you want the wave to basically travel deep, longer distances in the film. So that's the trick that this is the reason that you do it at multiple wavelengths. And okay, so you want to increase the path length in the film, okay, and multiple angles probe physical thickness multiple times actually. Okay, you can see that multiple times the wave, and multiple angles obviously increase confidence level, but not always. It is not always true. And multiple angles are good for if you have multiple layer and you have absorbing anisotropic and graded film. Okay, graded films basically that I think we discussed yesterday, that if you have, for example, zinc oxide, for example, you have zinc oxide and you are doping it with manganese or whatever, and then uh, this manganese doping is not uniform across the thickness, but there is some gradation actually, right? It's, for example, manganese doping is increasing along the depth. So then what to do? Anisotropic film will take up a very interesting topic, very interesting topic uh, for lip symmetry. We'll take up in the second uh, program. And this is this we have done quite a lot anyway. So this has been covered. So let us skip it. Typical angle, this has been covered multiple times. Let us now finally we'll spend some time on data analysis. And so basically, I mean, obviously we need to analyze data. Why? Okay, this sounds stupid question. Anyway, so first you build a model. So you decide what are your layers, and then you decide what are your fit parameters. You basically identify your fit parameter as minimum as possible. And if you have some gas, initial gas, so if you have closer gas from other sources, other experimental techniques, so then it will make your fitting easier, and your mean MSE value will be much smaller. And then finally you have to interpret. And don't forget, this last point is the most important point. It's not like this fitting. The problem, I think, people who have some computational background from their PhD. In fact, like my PhD, I had a lot of. We used to make softwares at that time because we did not have commercial software. So every software we used to make actually using um, hardcore programming. So you have to finally use your own common sense, whether if your model which you have made is giving you something, because now it is model based, right? Whatever n and k and t you are getting for each layer, whether these values are physical, they sounds okay, or you are just trapped into some for example, I'll show you. For example, you might be trapped somewhere in a local minima, and you may get some comfortable MSc, but you may not. You may cheer much sooner about your lower MSc, but you may not be aware that there is another heaven sitting here where it's waiting for you. But only thing is that you have to just do some effort and travel from here to here, and then you will find the ocean, actually the depth. So so don't get trapped into these islands actually, otherwise you will have problems. So you have to decide whether you are sitting here or actually you are sitting here. Okay, so that decision artificial intelligence cannot take, and you have to take for the time being. Okay, whether the results are physical or they're unphysical. So because any model can make ant into elephant and elephant into a goat or something else. So please be aware. Final decision rests upon you. It should not happen. They become a bit too unrealistic to be accepted. Okay, quite unrealistic. So just to recap, we do not directly measure film thickness and optical constant. Uh, of course, psi and delta are a function of these parameters, and we need to build a model, and then again we use Fresnel's reflection coefficients and Snell's law, which are standard equations, to calculate and then find these values. How do we do that? For example, this is the flow chart that you do the measurements and you get some values, and then you make the model for n number of films. So Okay, and then you generate the data, and then you compare this versus this, and then least square. This is an iterative process, so you do it over and over again until you have right values of thickness, roughness, uniformity, and NNK, all kinds of things. Yes. So so start with the substrate. First, you have to start with the substrate. I think there was a lot of discussion by some students. There were very interesting questions by Anchal and Ruchi and many people about the substrate thickness, whether it matters a lot, it matters or not. So you can see here also it is taken as by default. You can take it as 1 millimeter. Okay, it does not matter actually. So you have to start with your substrate from library, and silicon oxide is again available in library model. Okay, when I say what is available in library data is basically lambda versus n versus k. That is the library data. So obviously you can convert it. You can convert it to lambda versus epsilon 1, epsilon 2. If this data is available, then unknown is thickness, right? Thickness is the unknown. So because n and k you already know at some lambdas. So somebody was asking, I think um, Shefali was asking actually about this physical significance. So physical significance, I mean the utility of those those dispersion model is that basically just to interpolate, because this model may not have uh, N and K for all the wavelengths, right? It may have, for example, for 200 and sorry, um, I'm sorry, yeah. So it may have for, like, for example, 200 nanometer, some NNK, 300. Uh, okay. So it may not have for your desired value. For example, you are taking data on 220. So this library may not have. So what you do, you use that empirical equation to fit, and then you can interpolate. But wherever you need your point, actually, I mean, okay, so you can calculate actually, and without much error. And these are actually your library data, these solid points. And but you want data at some other points, but somebody may not be able to give you. So then you just, so that is the only purpose. Okay. Now next thing is so you do iterations that has been already demonstrated by students, that this is first iteration, and then there's a second iteration. You can see that the gap between model fit and the measured value, the experimental values, is becoming lesser and lesser. So here you can see that it looks better. And then finally you can merge uh, these two things, and you can look at the delta and psi. They look good, and you can look at after fifth iteration. So you can do several iterations, and then your MSC value looks impressive. And these are your Cauchy parameter if you have used the Cauchy layer instead of silicon oxide. Okay, and then so it looks all good, and then fine. So this is how you fit things. And if people who are interested like me, I mean, I'm always interested in algorithm actually, because I have a lot of experience from past in hardcore computer programming. So person like me always ask this question, that what is the algorithm actually? So for people who are interested in algorithm, this is the algorithm basically, that you based on your model, you calculate psi. How do you do that? Again, Fresnel's equation, Snell's law. You can easily do that, right? And this is your generated your experimental value. Again, for so you basically you look at the comparison, you compare between them, and then you look at this chi value, and you try to minimize. So you basically go to the next n k t value. Okay, whatever is your fit parameter. I'm not sure whether you are fitting t, or you're fitting n, or you're fitting k, or multiple layers you are fitting. That depends. So whatever you have selected, based on that, using Fresnel's equation, you get this value. Okay, and then you do the, so algorithm automatically chooses the next value. Okay, and then for example, it will try to move here. So for example, you are somewhere here, so you have an option to go either this way or this way. So here you go to, I mean, your data is going to hell, and this is the road to heaven, right? And this is the road to hell, right? People say that where is heaven? I have not seen heaven, and I have not seen hell. So you can see that I'm showing you heaven and hell right here on the computer screen. So you don't want to go into this direction and get trapped here, because it has a choice. Uh, because, for example, so suppose you are sitting somewhere here, the software will say that, okay, if I'm decreasing this value thickness, if I'm decreasing the thickness, so my MSC values. Let me tell you what I'm trying to tell you. For example, your MSC versus thickness value is like this, and you are sitting somewhere here, and your heaven is here. This is your heaven, and you're sitting here. But now this your algorithm will work uh, in a way that it will take you towards this direction, because slight increase in the thickness, MSC value is going into is decreasing. So it will take you, it will trap you here. It will tell you, okay, wow, you have reached to the MSC limit, and go home, and wow. But so what can so this is the wrong which can happen. So here it depends upon how shallow is your and minimum local minimum. And okay, so be very careful. You may get trapped here for okay. But if you have sharp change, then you are fine. You will immediately fall back here, because algorithm will not take much time to drive you towards here. Okay. And, but if you are in a shallow, then you need more iteration, because software will slowly find okay, and it will even if it has moved, it will not be happy. So it will move in this direction again, and it will realize that, okay, if I increase the fit parameter, whether it is thickness, so this MSE has started increasing again. It has to check right again here, because it has checked this reason. But again, algorithm has to go this direction and prove that MSC value is becoming worse. Then it will come back, and then it will tell you that, okay, this is your result. That's how any least square refinement works all over world, by this principle. Unless you use now, next innovation will be um, artificial intelligence, which will be probably better. It will be able to suggest. And I'm not joking. Actually, it's a reality that here artificial intelligence integration into the Lipsmetry will be much better than our human intervention. There, this gas will be much intelligence, because much intelligent, because artificial intelligence will be able to browse the uh, available data on internet. For example, Ruchi mentioned one material. So instead of Ruchi, Ruchi may not feel good today. आज मन नहीं कर रहा है मेरा paper पढ़ने का. So, but artificial intelligence will browse thousands of papers based on her material type, and it will be able to tell what is going to be the best NNK and all kinds of measurement parameter. So you understand that. So this probably ellipsometry measurements can be better done by AI than humans. I have a firm belief. Uh, but artificial intelligence cannot teach you the interaction of electromagnetic radiation with matter. Actually, that you have to learn with our own intelligence. Actually, right? Quality of the data fit you already know. If you know the logic, then people who make hardcore computer program, they don't need to worry about quality and all those things. I strongly suggest that all of you should have some I tell my own students also that all of you should have some exposure to computer programming, please. Data fitting, actually analysis. You make your own program, then you will have fun actually. Okay, it will increase your confidence. Otherwise, see all these modeling, completees, WBase, somebody else wrote the program. In our time, actually, we used to write this program. For example, I did not have Origin, so I created my own plotting program. So where I could do 3D plotting, because there was no software available. that time, think about my PhD. I started my PhD in 95. I mean, many of you were not born, I think, at that time, right? Sarabjit Singh, were you born in 95? I think you must be, you were already born. Not Ruchi Singh. Ruchi, were you already alive? You were on this planet or some other planet? 95.
Sir, I am on the planet at that time.
You are already on this planet. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Who are you? Who is talking?
I'm Anand.
Anand, you already okay. So I'm sure that many of you are not born by 95. Um, okay, so that time we did not have, we had actually my computer was 386 and 80 megabyte memory. Okay, no, not 80 megabyte, 800 megabyte hard disk size, and it was 386. And I never used Windows in my PhD. I used DOS, and I used to use all my programs I used to make actually. If I need some program, I will make. If I need to plot data, I need to make program for that. Okay, and all the typing, everything we did in LaTeX. Again, that is also programming language. We did not use MS Word, MS Office. MS Office we did not. I never used in my PhD. Probably in the last few months. Okay. Anyway, so that is. So let us go back to the come back to the present moment. But I'm telling you that what message I'm trying to tell you, that it was not a bad time. I'm happy that actually I'm very happy that I saw that time of deficiency. So that we learned actually, because we did not have equipments. So if you need some measurement, you have to make that machine actually. I made so many cryostats for down to liquid helium, liquid nitrogen, high temperature. I made all my furnaces, which now you buy for 30, 40 lakh rupees. 3-zone furnaces I made actually. I made single crystal facility. No, nothing we purchased from market actually. Okay, like Atmanirbhar actually. We were Atmanirbhar. So I made this vibrating sample magnetometer, cryostat, everything. That was India's first. So a lot of innovation happened actually from the lab. So but that gave us a lot of confidence. So my training is actually very old fashioned. Okay, and my interaction with guide was completely almost zero actually. I can tell you on record, it's being recorded actually. I tell my students I never attended any single lecture of my guide in entire PhD. Even till today, I've attended only one lecture of my guide, only one lecture. That was in a conference in Delhi University, where he was also a speaker and I was speaker. That was the only lecture which I attended. So there was a lot of self-learning actually, self-clearing the doubts, and you need to do it yourself. Nobody was there to teach me ellipse symmetry actually or something else. So that make you Atmanirbhar. So anyway, so this is the last. Yes.
Sir, I wanted to ask the algorithm that is used in ellipsometry. Can we use the same algorithm in any other scientific programming language?
See, we have used XPS analysis software to routinely for ellipsometry data analysis. In my lab, the last student I properly trained, Vivekananda, he is in semiconductor lab in US, in semiconductor, no, not lab actually, semiconductor company, Micron, I think, right, which makes your RAM and so you can use XPS software, which is much better than this ellipsometry softwares for data analysis, complex data analysis, where you need to put the oscillators, etc. Or you can make your own software for ellipsometry data analysis. I mean, best is that you make your own program, actually, you write your own program for ellipsometry data analysis.
So just out of curiosity, for XPS as well as this ellipsometry, which is the language that people nowadays are using?
I'm not sure about other people, but I love old-fashioned thing. I'm trained in QBasic, so I love basics or C. But I think new generation people are using all kinds of I think Python and other things. But I'm not trained in those things. I still love the old-fashioned crude programming, Fortran or Basic or C. Those three languages I know actually.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so can we use
But
Fortran
what
to
I'm
write?
telling you, Pooja, wait.
Yes.
So that student was using we had a program which we used some commercial one, which we used to use for XPS analysis. I don't remember the name. Maybe some of my students can. So we used to use that for ellipsometry data analysis, and it worked much better than the ellipsometry softwares actually. Yes, Pooja.
Sir, actually, in the last semester, we had a glimpse of Fortran language. So that's why I had this curiosity whether we can use same programming in Fortran to.
You can make program in Fortran easily for ellipsometry analysis.
Okay, sir.
Yes. I mean, you will get better. You will have better control over your data analysis than your this ellipsometry software can provide you. I can assure you. You will find yourself in control actually. Here, problem is that these softwares, commercial softwares, are like black box. You are given some options. You click this and you check this. You check this and you click some button and then it does something and then it shows you something and you are wondering what exactly happens in those seconds. When you
Yes,
write
sir.
your program, you really know what is going on actually. You can fix it, you can improve it. So somebody else, somebody else wrote those programs. So that's my humble, problem. But problem I face that this today's generation somehow people are not interested in writing hardcore source code actually. They don't write actually. Even computational chemistry people, they don't write actually, which is not good sign for future actually. I mean, my code used to run for days and days in my PhD. Actually, I mean, I was the first person in GNU to automate and all the instruments actually. Earlier before I came, we used to remote it, and it became part of my PhD thesis for that reason. So I made the program that instrument will run 4 5 machines will talk and listen to the computer, and they will run for like more than 2 3 days until electricity fails or some water supply fails actually, and I'll be sleeping on the floor, and that was the time actually. So it was good actually. I don't regret it, though it was a sort of harshness. So, but it makes you a little bit independent actually. So the conclusion is that ellipsometry measures change in the polarization, and we look at the desired material properties. We analyze the data, and then we look at the proper model, and then mathematical calculations are done. Compare psi and delta from model to the experimental values. So I will skip it here. Next session, I will not jump because that will be more. But these topics have been touched upon the concepts, but maybe some other time. So we'll spend some time today to discuss, and let us have some discussions. Any question? Mr. Santosh Reddy?